Kumlena Black Gemara, Mitzvah Shabbos Kodesh. Today's daf is daf Yud Ches, and just a brief summary. The Mishnah talks about how you have two neighbors, and you have to ensure that you don't cause any damage to your neighbor with activities you do on your own property. Either it's a question of monetary damage, or it's a question of an isur of being mazik someone else. It's a dini mamonus, a dini isur, but these are the rules. And the Mishnah says that you have to have a certain distance. If you make a pit in your side of the property, it has to be a certain distance from the other person's pit. In fact, if we turned out to be, it has to be a distance of 6 tvachim, because the wall of your boir has to be 3 tvachim thick, and so to the wall of his boir. So you have to, when you make a boir, it has to be a minimum of 3 tvachim away from the boundary, so that you have a 3 tvachim wall. And the problem with the boir is a machlekes rishonim. Is it only a boir that contains water, and we're concerned about leakage, or the water was going to seep into the other person's boir, or just generally the construction of a boir weakens the entire soil because you had to dig it out, and therefore it weakens not only your side but the other person's side, unless you have a certain distance from the two. Then we have machlekes Abaye v'Rava. What about if the other the concern that we have regarding affecting your neighbor doesn't exist? The other person didn't yet dig a hole in the ground. So do you still have to be concerned or not? According to Abaye, we don't have to be worried about a hezek if there's no nizik there. According to Rava, even if the person's boir is not there, you still have to take all the necessary precautions. You still have to dig it 3 tvachim away. So, and then we explained that there's two possibilities of understanding Abaye and Rava. One view is that their whole argument is talking about a case. Okay, we're talking about where there's no other boir there yet, but it's a field that generally nobody builds a boir there. Plenty of rainwater. There's no reason to build all kinds of pits and cisterns on your property. As a result of that, Rava says that Abaye says you can build up to the boundary because probably they won't be building anything in the future. But Rava says, nevertheless, that person can change his mind and can build. So therefore, even though there's no nizik here at the time, and even though there's not a strong likelihood there ever will be one, you have to deal with it and treat it as if there will be one, and you have to build it 3 tvachim away. And even Rabbi Yossi, who says generally the nizik has to take all the precautions, the person who's going to be damaged, in this case, and Rabbi Yossi is moide that gira delay, which means that if it's your fault, the moment you start digging the hole, you're already weakening the structure, and that's the start. And therefore, even Rabbi Yossi will agree you have to build it 3 tvachim away from the wall. The other version is that even in a case where there's a good probability, a good likelihood that the person will build a boir, for example, they need water, irrigation, nevertheless, according to Abaye, if the boir is not in existence yet, no damage is being done, and you're doing it all on your side of the property, you can build right up to the fence, right up to the boundary. And according to the Rava says, no, you have no right to. You have no right to, because that person will build a boir, either because you cause a hezek, or because the guy has rights in the property and you have no right to take away those rights. Okay, so Gemara is bringing a number of proofs. Every one of them is actually supporting Abaye rather than Rava. It's amazing. The entire Gemara is going to be stacked against Rava, except 1 or 2 questions with Abaye, and yet the halacha is going to be like Rava, not like Abaye. But so the last line, Toshma, coming here. So we're quoting different parts of our Mishnah, and every part of our Mishnah, when it talks about keeping a certain distance, it always highlights that the other person, your neighbor, already has that object that's being threatened by your new activity, and as if to say, but if the item didn't exist, then there's no concern, which supports Abaye a question on Rava, and we'll go through every part of the Mishnah. So Toshma, coming here. You have to distance the gefes, the leftovers of the olives after you press them. And fertilizer, melech and salt, seed and lime, and stones, flint stones. You should have them 3 tvachim away, at least 3 tvachim away. Or you put plaster. We'll see later whether it means and or. Anyway, time. So this is the second part of the Mishnah. It seems from here only it says koisle, the wall's already in existence. Time of the koisle is the wall. How like a koisle with no wall? So I must be allowed to bring it up to the boundary. Does the Gemara no? So now there's a question on Rava, because Rava holds that that if there's no wall, you still cannot bring it to the boundary. So Rabbi says, no. Doesn't matter whether the wall is in existence or not. You're not allowed to bring it up to the boundary. So what was the Mishnah trying to tell us? How come the Mishnah trying to tell us the Hani Kashal Kaisim? Trying to tell us the reason. But we don't want you to place these things next to the boundary because they will cause harm and damage to the wall. Other things we don't care about, but these things, all of them, they cause damage to the structure of the wall. Taisus already asks, what's the big deal? Put salt there or lime or stones, whatever it is. If the other guy wants to build a wall, just remove them all. Remove it then. It's not like they dug a hole. It's just something on the surface of the ground. So Taisa answers, the moment you place it there, you're already damaging the ground, permanent damage. So it doesn't help removing them. Or the person feels he might have to argue with you and take it to the Torah. In the meantime, you're delaying the structure of their wall. Rabbeinu Yonah, however, says that our concern is, and this has many ramifications in halacha, that our concern is the reason why we don't allow you to put zephyrs and all that near the wall is because the neighbor is worried you're going to have it there for 3 years, and then you're going to claim a chazaka because I didn't protest. And then when I do want to build a wall eventually, you're going to say you already have a right. You have a chazaka to keep your zephyrs over there or your zeva, whatever you want to put, your stones, your flintstones, and I will have no say. I'm worried about a chazaka. That is what Rabbeinu Yonah says. As a result of that, the Rabbeinu Yonah rules, and the Rishonim will follow Rabbeinu rules, if somebody wants to build a window in his house, and a window in his house, the thing is that the person over there might want to one day build a wall, and he wants to say, hey, I'm going to build a wall, and you're going to scream at me that you have a 3-year chazaka, and therefore you earned the right for sunlight, and have the right to build a wall. So I'm going to protest right now, and I'm not going to allow you to build yourself a window, which you didn't have one yet. I'm not going to allow you to open up a window in your on this wall facing my side of my property, because you're going to prevent me from building a wall in 3 years from now if you're going to claim you have a chazak. Others totally disagree. Others totally disagree. Anyway, so Gemara says further. By the way, there's a big machlekes according to Abaya. Big machlekes Rishayim. According to Abaya, Kiv Eger has a whole elaborate. According to Abaya, you're allowed to build up to the front. There's nobody there yet. He didn't build his bar yet. He didn't build his wall. You can build up to the boundary. What happens eventually? The guy wants to build a wall, or he wants to put a pit into his property. Do then I have to remove the zephys, even though I had a right to do it till now, but now I'm going to start becoming a mazik? Or do we say, once I put it there, when I had the right to put it there, I can leave it there, even though now you're about to construct a wall? Too bad, because when I placed it there, it's on my property, and I had a right to do it. Big machlekes. Anyhow, the Gemara continues further. Toshma, coming here. Marchikim es azroyim. The Mishnah continues. You have to distance the seed with a machlisha, the plowshare, with medaglaim and urine, menakoisel from the existing wall. Sounds like there's an existing wall. So time with the existing wall. Halakha is no existing wall. Samach, you bring to the boundary. Even if there's no existing wall, you're not, as Rava said, this is all question of Rava, you're not allowed to bring it up to the boundary. So why does the Mishnah say the existing wall? Kamash wants to teach you the misnafsna kosher lekaisel. He wants to tell you that there's explain to you the problem. The problem is a pit that is moist and wet. It might, seep into the other side and ruin the wall. So this, okay, so Gemara continues further. Toshma, coming here. There's a rechayim. This will continue the Mishnah. Each one of these clauses of the Mishnah. You have a mill, and you have the mill. So he says gimel min hashechev 3 tvach. So the mill, the bottom of the mill is wider than the top of the mill. So gimel min hashechev, the stone, the millstone that's on the bottom is called the shecher, the one's lying there, which is wider, which is 3 tvachim from there you have to keep in the boundary. Shehein dalam alecha, but then it tapers off. It tapers in, and the rechev, the top millstone, is narrower, and so therefore the distance from there to the wall is 4 tvachim. Again, we're talking about a wall. Time with the existing wall, that's the problem. There's no existing wall. Somebody he can bring it up to the boundary. A kasha on Rava, who says that you can never, even that nizik is not there present, you cannot bring it to the boundary. No. Even if there's no wall, that you're not allowed to bring to the boundary. Well, the Ma'ikamasha, what's going to teach you? Hakamasha teach you the tiraya kosher lekaisel. What does a mill do? A mill, makes the ground shake and tremble and reverberate, and that can cause the ground, cause the wall, the structure to weaken. So to explain to you what the problem is, why millstones are a problem. Tashma, next part. It says there's a Tana, the Mishnah ends off. What about an oven? So the oven basically is a base, which is wider, and it tapers in, which is narrower, and then the heat is then very concentrated. That's an oven. So Hatana, the oven, shleishim and akilya feet from the bottom, shein dalam and asafa 4 from the top. Again, for the wall, because it generates this heat. Time when you could go there's a wall. A wall, something you can bring it up to the boundary. So the same theme we're going through the entire Mishnah. The Mishnah tell you, you should know that also heat can adversely affect the structure of the wall, and therefore it's forbidden. Tashma coming here. It says in later Mishnah, La Yiftach Adam, a person, let's say you're living downstairs and someone else is living upstairs. Don't open a chanus shotach nachtumin. Don't open a bakery, which then you need a very strong oven in your house. But shaltzaboyin, or people who dye things, again, you have to cook, you need a big, strong fire. Tachas oitzode shalchaved. If your friend, if your neighbor upstairs, it stores things, you should not open up a bakery with ovens. Nor don't bring in your cattle into your own house if upstairs is an existing Eitzer or warehouse. Now it sounds like the only reason why you cannot do that is because you're a mazik, you're causing damage. But why that's a problem is time because there's a pre-existing Eitzer, the upstairs is being used. How like Eitzer, the upstairs is not being used at all, then oven. You can do whatever you want. Even though you're a mazik, it seems like you can do whatever you want. A question on Rava says the Gemara Dira Shiny. The Gemara says your house is one step more than everything else. In other words, when Abaye said you could bring it up to the boundary is because I'm working, like Rabbi Yossi says, I am working on my side of the property. I'm working on my side. I'm not doing anything on your side. It's all on my side. But the result will be that it'll affect you. So we say that Abaye says, well, the other object is not there yet, the item is not there yet, you can bring it up to the boundary. If it's there, of course you can. But when it comes to a dira is much more than a chatzar. Dira, this is my house. I can do whatever I want in my house. So if I am mazik, I can do whatever I want in my house, but I have no right to be mazik you. But if you're not there, even though I will definitely be mazik in the future, if you're not there, Rava will concede that you can put something, whatever you want, because it's your dira. And dira gives you more rights than a chatzar. In a chatzar, you don't have the right to bring it up to the boundary, even though at the moment you're not causing hezek, because one day you might cause hezek. But in a dira, I do have the right to do whatever I want in my house if I'm not affecting you right now. I tell you, if eventually the person upstairs decides to use it as storage, can he then get you to remove your oven or not? Or once you've been allowed to permitted to do it, it remains that way. And this big machlekes Rashi takes another shaynim. What exactly the problem of an oven is when we say, is it the heat of the oven or is it the smoke of the oven? Rashi says it's the smoke that the oven generates upstairs. And Taisa says no, you have a ceiling and you have the ceiling prevents the smoke from upstairs. It's the heat. The heat still penetrates and that can ruin whatever stock you have upstairs. Says you want it further. I take it, I'll prove it to you. Tanya, it says clearly in this Mishnah, it says clearly in the Mishnah, stipulates that if the person downstairs brought in his animals into downstairs, there's a terrible stench. If he's there before the upstairs, then you're allowed to bring them in. It's mutter, it's permitted. So we see clearly from here that that Rava says, even I will concede, because it's your house, we treat it very differently. You have more rights within your house, as long as whatever you're doing is within your own home. Then when further Toshma, it says Lo Yita, and another Mishnah later on. Lo Yita, we're going through most of the Mishnahs in this parak. But this is what this parak is all about. Lo Yachber is all about that you do preventative measures that you shouldn't eventually cause harm to someone else, to your neighbor. Lo Yita Adam Ilan Samach L'Sada. You should not plant a tree. Later on, we learned about not planting a tree next to a bur, and we said because the roots of the tree eventually will break through the bur, so you have to distance 25 amos. 25 amos. But here we're talking about a field that a wheat field or something. No bur is here, just a wheat field. is what distance do you have to have between your tree and their field? In this case, all you need is 4 amos. Why? Why need 4 amos? What's the idea of 4 amos? The Tanei Allah we learned Dalid amos she'amru. You know why we have Dalid amos? Kedei avodas hakerem. Because you have trees and you have to work around the trees. We're using kerem as an example, a vineyard, but it can be any tree. And you have to take your plowshares, whatever it is, and you have to take all your tools and everything else, and you need 4 amos of space. And we don't want you to infringe on another person's property. So therefore, you need to give yourself a perimeter of 4 amos around your tree, a distance of 4 amos from the boundary. 4 amos from the boundary. Says the Gemara, time, but the only reason is the only reason why we're preventing you from doing this is because avodas hakerem. We don't want you, because you need the 4 amos for your kerem, so you need to distance from the boundary. Halav mishum kedai. Had it not been for that reason, you'd be able to bring it up to the boundary. But eventually the roots of your tree will come along and cause all kinds of damage, and we're not worried about the roots eventually. The only reason we're holding back is because right now you're going to cause them damage, because you're going to have your animals and all your equipment working around the tree, and if you're going to be on the boundary, you're going to be ruining the guy's field directly. But otherwise, no other issues. Doesn't that prove Abai is right? You can bring it, as long as there's no, you're not causing any direct damage right now, you can bring it all the way up to the boundary. Says the Gemara, we're not worried about the roots. We're not worried about the roots. The mafsik tzunma, there's a rock there, right there in the boundary, the rock wedged into the ground that prevents the roots from crossing over. So roots are not the issue. That's why Rabbi would say in this case, you're not going to ever cause damage. So technically, you should be able to bring, or theoretically, you should be able to bring it to the boundary. But no, you can't, because avodas hakerem. Avodas hakerem. Says the Gemara, I'll prove it to you. It says, there was a fence between two neighbors. If there's a fence there, I can bring my tree, my vineyard, all the way up to the fence. It's not a drama, because anyway, I cannot work around that side of the tree, so I won't in any way damage your property. So we see clearly from here that we're not worried about or anything below. We're only worried about the avodas hakerem. Now Rashi goes along and adds a chiddush here, that if there's a fence between the two properties, not only aren't we worried about the damage of 4 amos, we're not even worried about climb. We're not worried about climb at all. Even though the roots of this particular species on one side of the fence will go underneath the ground and meet up with the roots from another species, from the other neighbor, and they're going to join together and get nurtured together, isn't that climb? And Rashi says, no, climb is only if it's above the ground. The Rimagash argues that he says climb doesn't matter whether you mix above the ground or you mix below the ground, it's climb. But Rashi says there's no climb here. So according to Rimagash, talking about it's the same species, we're only worried about whether the roots are going to cause damage, and we're saying no, there's no damage here because the fence keeps them separated. Says the Gemara, but what happens
in terms of halacha, we go with that it's above the ground. I remember correct.
Yeah,
not below.
Rashi and the Rambam. Yeah. Says the Gemara, if so, Ema Sefer. If so, Ema Sefer. Let's see the next part. It says there, you just told me there's a stone there, right? Which means you're telling me there's no possibility of the roots. So the roots don't concern me at all. So let me ask you a question. It says the roots went into the next door neighbor's property. Now what? So what do? If your neighbor's roots are inside your property, you have a right to go ahead and dig up 3 tvachim in the ground so that your plowshare can do its work. Even as a result of that, you're going to be killing or part of the roots of the other guy's tree. You're permitted to do up to 3 tvachim. In order to make sure that your plowshare can work properly. Now, you're telling me that roots, there's a stone wedged in this particular case, all the way down to the bottom. And therefore, there's no issue here of roots crossing over. So what are you talking about? The case where you can dig up to 3 tvachim. There are no roots. Your neighbor's roots are not extending to your property. My boy Hassam, what's going on here? Where roots come in? The Rabbi will answer, Hachikam, this is how we're supposed to learn. The ilav tzum, We're talking about that there's a tzunba there, so therefore we're not worried about the roots. The only reason why you have to distance them 4 amos is only because of avodas hakeret. You need to do work around the tree. But what happens if you lav tzunba in the case where there's no stone there? Then we are worried about the roots. There and it's actually the roots crossed over to the French properties. You're allowed to dig in 3 tvachim. Why should I, so that you shouldn't hold back the person's plant? Only question is, if you're not allowed to, if there is no stone there, you're not allowed to plant a tree within 25 amos, where the roots extend 25 amos. So what are we talking about again? So how is the tree there in the first place? If there's no stone there, how is the tree there? And in fact, the din is, if you put a tree there illegally, you can cut the tree down because the field is already pre-existing. So Traces in one answer says, okay, we'll see the Gemara next Gemara. We'll see who said whatever the next Gemara's answer is, we'll have to use it for here as well. But the Riva said no, it's talking about he did it illegally. But even though he did it illegally, we don't really cut a tree down, as we'll see later on. It's a hefsid meruba. It's a very big loss. So even though he did it illegally, we don't cut the tree down, but he has to compensate monetarily the neighbor. So he put the tree there, and he has to compensate the neighbor. Says the Gemara further, Toshma coming here, you have to distance the tree if you want to plant a tree. And there's a boy there, 25 amos. Sounds like the boy is already in existence. Time, but you can burn the boy in existence. Hold like a boy, something. But when a bit burning existence, you can bring it up to the boundary. Kasha and Rava said, well, I know. Kileka bar nami with him. Even if there's no boy there, you're not allowed to bring it up to the boundary. Well, Kamasha comes to teach you the ad chof hey ama ozli shrashim umaskil boy. The Mishnah will tell you what distance do you have to plant a tree from the boundary, and this is 25 amas. Why? Because that person they can dig up a boy, and you're going to ruin this boy. So that's a question. So you're telling me it doesn't matter when the boy, if the boy was pre-existing or not, you're not allowed to plant a tree. So tell me, explain to me the next line. It says in the Mishnah there, if you planted the tree first, in other words, there was no pre-existing bird, la yakutz. You don't cut the tree down. Now, if you're telling me you Rava hold that you can never plant a tree, you tell me even if there's no pre-existing bird, Rava says you're not allowed to plant a tree within 25 amos. So what's the Mishnah saying that if you planted a tree, don't cut it down, but you're not allowed to? How do you find a case that he planted a tree? It sounds like legitimately. When you're not allowed to, you just said that according to Rava, even there's no pre-existing bird, you're not allowed to plant a tree because one day there might be a bird and you'll cause them damage. Said the Gemara, we'll use an answer that Papa said later on, we'll use it here. And this is what Tais was referring to, we'll use it before as well. And that is as follows. Biloi keach. You know what it's talking about here? Hachanami biloi keach. Talking about one person owned the entire field. And he planted a tree in the middle of the field. And then he decided to section off his field. And he divided the field in half, and he sold off half the field. So now the tree is within 25 amas of the boundary. But when he planted the tree, it was legitimate. It was legitimate. So the tree, according to what Rashi is learning, the mazik is the one who did it legally. He planted the tree legally, but he is the mazik. But then now he sold off the boy. The boy belongs now to the nizik. And in this case over here, we say, well, we don't have to, we don't cut the tree down. You just give money because it's too big of a loss to cut the tree down. And what's the case of a papa? So that's the next case. When did a papa give his answer? Toshma. It says later, another Mishnah later on, if you have water that you soak flax in, you have to soak flax in for a couple of days to loosen it up so that you can turn it into linen. So that water, it can destroy your vegetation. So marchikin as hamishra min hayerek, you have to distance that water from, let's say, your neighbor's garden or vegetables. There's akreishin min haptzolin. Interesting, even though leeks are in the same family of onions, you shouldn't plant leeks next to onion because it steals some of the flavor and some of the bitterness from the onions. There's achardul min hadeboilim, and so too, you have to remove the chardul, the mustard, from the bees. Now the story is follows. This sugya is known as the sugya of chardul, which if you learn Tzasa Choshen, there's pages and pages on it. There are a lot of opinions what's going on over here. It's very complicated Gemara, but we'll learn pretty straightforward. What the story here is that when you have mustard plant next to bees, the bees then go and eat the mustard seeds or the leaves of the mustard plant, and then it's bitter. So because it's bitter for the bees, they go back and they eat their own honey to sort of, I guess, to assuage the bitterness of the mustard. So the mustard plant is actually the mazikir, and the bees, they are the victim. They're the nizik, because they are the ones now who by even though they had the right to eat the mustard seeds, but they ate the mustard seeds. We'll see later about that part. But they ate the mustard seeds. They're not the ones who are affected by it, and they're going to go eat up their own honey. So therefore, you should distance the chardal. The owner of the chardal is a mazik. So he should distance himself from wherever the beehive is. The only reason is because the yerek is existing. For example, the first case, distance the mishnah from the yerek because the yerek is already existing. Like a yerek, the yerek was not existing. Then somebody he'll bring it to the boundary. It's like a bias says. Question on Rabbi. Then all I know, he let the yerek nami l'samach. Even if there are no vegetables, you're not allowed to bring your mishnah up to the boundary. And the only mission trying to tell you is the hani koshi ahadodi, that these are bad. Not everything is bad for vegetable, but these things are bad. He has to nominate what these things are. Just explain to you what the problem is. Not that the vegetable has to be here. It's amazing. One thing I want to ask the question once or twice, and we get the gist of what how we're going to learn the rest of the Mishnahs. Why does he want to have to keep on going, ask the same question just from another law, and we give exactly the same answer? The Mishnah is not trying to tell you that it has to be pre-existing. It's just explaining to you what the problems are and which items the problem is with, and therefore how do you remedy it. So I'm not sure why they're going to have to continuously ask basically the same question. If the principle of the question is the same, and the answer of the principle is the same as well. So obviously, each one adds something that you wouldn't have known from the previous questions and answers. Says the Gemara, so you're telling me that even if the thing is not existing, you're not allowed to do these things. So let's go to the case, for example, of the chardal and the debar, which must be talking about a case where you want to bring the chardal up to the boundary, and the bees are not there yet. And Rava says you're not allowed to plant those mustard seeds. You're not allowed to. So that's the question. So, the next thing is Rabbi Yossi argues. He argues with the rabbis. He says, you say that you cannot plant the chardal. I hold matul bechardal. You could plant. You know why you can plant the chardal? The guy from the mustard can turn around and say to the owner of the bees, you're telling me you're telling me I'm the mazik, I have to eliminate, I have to remove my mustard plants. I'm telling you, I'm telling you, you're the mazik, because your bees are coming to my property and eating my mustard seeds. So you should remove your bees, coming to eat coming to eat my leaves of my mustard plants, which is clear from here that the bees are already existing. When he made the mustard plant, the bees they're both existing already. You, Rava, said that it's talking about that you're not allowed to plant even there are no bees. So how can Rabbi Yossi say that the reason Rabbi Yossi says the reason why the guy in the mustard plant doesn't have to move it is because the bees are coming and causing him damage as well. You're a mazik just like I'm a mazik. But we're saying that even there's no bees in existence, you're not allowed to plant it there. Kasha Rava. We're on Yuchesam Base, the very top of the page. And if you're telling me you're not allowed to plant the mustard seeds, even there are no bees in existence, so how can you have this situation, this case, where he says, I'm not moving my mustard because your bees are attacking me? What bees? We're talking about a case where there are no bees. So how's the Rabbi learn Pshat? So Amar Papa comes along and says, you're right. Rabbi holds you never allowed to plant the mustard seeds next to the boundary. But you know how case is talking about? You know what case is talking about? Bit like Kayach. It's talking about that the person owned the property and he was the sole owner, and he went ahead and he planted his mustard plants, and then he sold off the other half of the property, which is right next to the mustard plants. So it was done beheter. He was a mazik, but he was done beheter. And now the other person bought the property, wants to go ahead and have a beehive there. And he says to the guy in the mustard plants, remove your mustard plants, because you're a mazik. And so that's how it was done, even according to Rav, in a legitimate way. And the person says back to him, he counters, but you are a mazik, just like I'm a mazik. So why should I move? Your bees are stealing my mustard seeds. Why should I move? Okay.
Because Michael, I don't hear this lekeach business, because if I buy a field and there is already the hazard on the other side, so that's the condition I'm buying the field. I know that I cannot put certain things next to it because there's something next to it when I buy
Yep.
it. So it's a condition of the purchase.
Knowledge is not considered conditions. But this is worse. Every single day, the mazik is continuing to be mazik. It's not just something there, therefore I can't do something. This thing here is a mazik for my bees. And we never stipulated that you cannot have a beehive there. And since people have beehives, they have their own little beehives that produce their own honey. And you didn't stipulate that you're not allowed to, that I'm selling you the property on the condition you don't build a beehive. And in fact, especially according to Rabbi Yossi, I accuse you of being a mazik as well. So I clearly should have stipulated, hey, I'm selling you the property, but I don't want you to have the right to put your beehive there because you're going to cause me damage. And he didn't. So therefore, that person is probably going to do there whatever he wants, as long as he's not mazik the other person. And that's the correct. So Rabbanan say that the Rabbanan go further. Rabbanan say in this case that the person in the beehive has a right to make a beehive, and the person who had the master plan, who did it legally, has to remove it because he's the mazik. That's what the Rabbanan say. It's Rabbi Yossi who says no, because he argues, you're a mazik as much as I am a mazik, so what should I move? But according to the Rabbanan, the person who planted the mustard seeds when he had every right to at the time, he was a sole owner, and yet since he sold the property and he didn't stipulate, don't put a beehive, that guy has a right to put a beehive. And now you're the mazik, the mustard is the mazik. The mazik has to remove the cause of this damage. Yep, that's what the Rabbanan say. By the way, this is how Rashi learns. Rabbeinu Tam Echan have a whole different shot, but it'll confuse things. So we'll just learn how Rashi learns. The Gemara continues. I'm not so happy. So first of all, as a little bit like the line what you're saying, but if we're talking about in this situation when we purchased, to my time in the Rabbanon, if the owner of the field had every right to plant that mustard plant, why should he have to move it? Why should he have to move it now because of you? It's not so much similar to your question, but we're not asking in Rabbi Yossi, we're asking in the Rabbanon. Why should the person who planted the mustard plant have to move it all? Since he had it, they had every right to do it in the first place. And you're putting yourself in that predicament. It's one thing if he didn't have a right to, but I had a right to do it. At the time, I didn't have to be concerned at all. Now, in the normal case, I have a neighbor, even though I have rights to do whatever I want on my property, I have to anticipate, and even though right now you don't have a bird there, but I have to anticipate that you might one day put a bird. I have to take that into account. But over here, I didn't have to take anything into account. The entire field was mine. So I had 100% a right to plant that mustard plant. Why in the world then? Why in the world then should I have to move it because you want to now make a beehive? That's question number one. Well, another question. My time with the Rabbi Yossi, my question then is, what is the logic in Rabbi Yossi? Why does Rabbi Yossi only argue in the case of mustard? Why doesn't it, if we're talking about a case where I had every right to do it in the first place, I'm the mazik. Why do I have to even respond and say, but you're a mazik like I am? Rabbi Yossi, could have just said, look, when I planted the mustard seeds, I was a sole owner. I had every right to plant the mustard plants. And that's all. End of story. I don't have to move because of that. And more than that, why does Rabbi Yossi only argue in the case of the mustard and the bees? He should also argue in the first case. I put the water for the flax there. It's the same case. Lekech is throughout all the cases, every single case there. The Mishnah, I'm the one who put the water there for the flax when there was no problem because it's all mine. And now you move in, too bad. Why should I have to move away when I did it 100% when I was allowed to do it? The same thing with the leaks and all that. Amar Ravina said, there's a big machlekes now, and this is negate halacha, whether it's Amar Ravina or Ella Amar Ravina. The way we're learning is like Rashi and others who learn Amar Ravina, which means that we're still continuing with the same idea that we learned till now, that Rava holds you're never allowed to, even though there's no nizik there at all, and maybe even if it was probably not ever going to be a nizik there, I am not allowed to build things up to the property, up to the boundary. I have to, move back a bit to anticipate maybe one day the other neighbor will do something. That's how Rashi learns, and we continue. But Rabbeinu Tam and others learn Ella, which means that we change everything around, and Rava concedes everything to Abaye, and the only time Rava and Abaye argue is regarding a boy, but nothing else changes the entire Gemara around. But let's continue like Rashi. Amar Ravina said, Kosavri Rabbanon, the Rabbanon hold ala mazik laharchik esatzmei. As a general principle, you're the one who's causing the harm. You're the one who has to take all the precautions necessary, not the victim. So even though you did it at a time when it was legal, you were the sole owner of the property, and therefore when you planted the tree, you were allowed to. Whatever you did was totally legal. You put the water there, but the fact is you're the mazik now. And he's doing it on his your neighbor, whatever he's doing on his property, he has every right to because it's his property. So because you're the one who's continuously mazik him, you have to eliminate the hezek. You got to remove the mustard. So now we need to understand. So what's Rabbi Yosef's logic? Must be, the Gemara says right now, that maybe Miklal Rabbi Yosef holds, since the mazik is working, the mazik didn't overstep the boundary. The mazik is working on his side of the boundary with his property. So therefore, the mazik doesn't have to take any precautions. It's the nizik that has to take all the precautions because I have every right on my property, whatever I want, even though I'm the one who is mazik to you. If it's gira delay, I'm causing direct damage, even though it's on my side of the property. Of course, I'm allowed to. But if it's something that will result over time and it's on my side of the property, then it's your problem, not mine. So it says Gemara. So Miklal, you must say, Rabbi Yossi holds, okay, if that's the logic, my original question still remains. I understand now the argument, the dispute between Rabban and Rabbi Yossi, but what I don't understand is why Rabbi Yossi only disputes a bird. Why doesn't he dispute the same thing regarding the main Mishnah, the water for the flax? The same thing. He should say, well, the mazik doesn't have to move away, it's a nizik. So why shouldn't the mazik bring the water of the flax up to the boundary? What's the Elam? To try again. Maybe there's another logic to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi nami ala mazik tulei. Rabbi Yossi agrees with the Rabbanan that it's the mazik that has to deal with it. So the hachi ka'amalahu, and this, but then your question you ask me is, so you ask why should there be a difference between the case of the mustard and the case of the Mishnah and all that? And this is what's happening. So Rabbi Yossi agrees that the mazik has to move away, even though if he did it legitimately. I understand. I agree with you. When it comes to May Misha, there's only one mazik involved, the person who has the flax water. So he has to, even though he did it at the time when it permitted, because he was the sole owner, but now that there's a problem, there's an issue, he has to move back. Okay, I understand that. And the same thing, with the vegetables, same thing with the leek and the onions. The hani maski, hani, hani la maski, hani. There's one victim and there's one perpetrator. So the perpetrator is the one who has to take all the precautions. But my argument with you is only on mustard and bees, because my argument is they're both harming each other. So why should one person have to move away from the other? He was there first, legitimately, and therefore why should he move? The other one is a mazik as much as he is. And they're both damaging each other. That's his argument. No. So what's the Rabbanans? How do they counter that? The Rabbanans say, no, we don't agree in that fact. We don't think they're both mazik each other. We don't believe the bees are mazik the mustard plant. What do you mean? But Rabbanan say that the bees are not mazik the mustard plant. Why? If it's the seeds, you're talking about, what are the bees eating? The seeds, they're consuming the seeds. They'll never find it. It's buried inside. The bees can't get to it. The Navas Bitarfa, you're talking about the leaves on top. Other parties, so what they ate the leaves? Tomorrow they'll grow back. That's not really a loss. That's not a hezek. So we hold there's only one mazik here. The mazik is the owner of the mustard plant, because the bees eat the mustard seed, the leaves. They get, that's all bitter. They go back, they suck up their own honey, and there's nothing left for the owner. That's the Gemara. I'm not happy with this, because now we're going back and forth. So you told me you switched. You said no. Rabbi Yossi holds it's the mazik. Rabbi Yossi agrees with the Chachamim. The mazik has to take all the precautions. The Savar Rabbi Yossi ala mazik lahach. That's what Rabbi Yossi really holds that. But now we'll learn the Mishnah later on. Rabbi Yossi says, I planted a tree with a pre-existing bud. I had no legitimate right to plant a tree. There's a pre-existing bud. And Rabbi Yossi says, lo yakatz. You don't have to cut the tree down. You know why? Because I did it on my property. And the damage does not happen straight away. It takes years before the damage takes place. And if it's on my property, I can do it. I cannot damage you straight away, directly. But if it's indirectly, I can do whatever I want. You dug on your own side of the property, and I am on my own side of the property. So now the question goes back. Rabbi Yasi holds an Nizik. So now goes back to our original question. So how come by doesn't argue in the case of the main Mishra? Why doesn't he argue in the case of the leak and tell the guy who owns the leak or the guy who owns the flax water? Sorry, you move away. I'm not moving. Says the Gemara, you're right. Rabbi Yossi holds that's exactly what he can say. I'm not moving, even though I'm the one who's causing the damage. It's on my side of the property. It takes a while till it gets to you. It's your problem. So why does he only argue with the rabbis with mustard? So this is how we learn Pshat. This is what he's telling to the rabbis. Lididi, personally, I hold in all instances the mazik doesn't have to move at all. Ala nizik lahachik it's the nizik that has to move. Even the case of the water and the vegetables, nope. The person who has the flax water does not have to move. He can go up to the boundary fence, no problem. It's his side of the property, and the damage doesn't happen straight away. But liditchu, you who claim that it's the mazik that has to move, and that's why the owner of the main Mishnah, the owner of the lease has to move. I understand that. The Amrita Lamazik, Tainach, I understand. Mishnah Viroka, the Hani Maska Hani, the Hani Maska Hani. Okay, it's one mazik there, one nizik, so the mazik has to move. But my argument is the Chardul with the body, Tavayu Maska, both damages on it. And the Rabbanan, the Boydul the Chardul the Maska. The Rabbanan say, no, there's only one mazik here, because the bees do not damage the mustard. If it's the seeds, let them find it. And Tarf, if it's the leaves, other party they grow back. So there's no problem. Okay, should we go a little further or should we stop? Because the Gemara now just goes through sections of the Mishnah explaining each section. The distances, why we do that.
What I didn't know is how much bees love mustard flowers.
I don't know, do they?
They do, yeah, apparently, yeah. I just checked. Apparently, mustard flower is a favorite of bees. So it's interesting.
Look at that.
Yeah, bees absolutely love mustard flowers. Bright yellow flowers produce an abundance of both pollen and nectar for bees.
And they don't learn a lesson that it's bitter eventually to stop eating the mustard?
That I didn't see. I'm just Googling mustard and I see the bees love mustard. Nicht gewusst. Steinsalz also writes the same thing, that in all of the land of Israel there's heaps of mustard flowers and bees thrive on this. So we are removed from beehiving. We don't know this.
But you know, there's a world shortage. There's a world shortage of bees now.
Yeah, the bees aren't eating the seeds.
Yeah.
They're just getting the pollen and the nectar, so they're not damaging the mustard plant.
Yeah,
that's possibly true. They don't eat any part of the leaves as well, or they damage some of the leaves.
Have to research this. This Indian.
Okay. Anyway, good luck, everybody.
Good luck.
Yeah.